All right, so here's the setup. We're going to work through some things on this document together and introduce charting. So go ahead and get this document downloaded and opened up if you haven't already. Again, it's called Uncharted Territory. It's in the assignment. And it may be obvious to you, but the whole idea behind charting is to take what can be hard to take apart and clearly understand in a big wall of numbers like we have here in front of us, and make parts of it very, very graphically clear, very understandable. So a chart is always going to be some aspect of this thing. It's never going to be the whole thing. So for example, maybe we want to do a little chart showing where the expenses were during quarter one, right? Now, as it happens, that's the first thing to do, is select what you want to chart. Now, there are parts of this that may not make it into the chart itself, but the thing is, we have to have meaningful labels like these: rent, utilities, payroll. We have to have those to identify what these numbers are that are in the column next door. So these things are going to turn into columns and column charts and pie slices and pie charts and so on. And without a label there, we're not going to have any information about what we're talking about. It's easy to make charts, and it's easy to make charts that are kind of dumb because they don't really explain themselves well. So understand this is really important. All right. Now, if we go up to the top, as you remember, right above the ribbon, we have all these various tabs, and we want the one that's called Insert. And toward the middle of the Insert ribbon, over here, we have recommended charts, and then we have all sorts of little different types of charts we could choose from, right? Now, there is some information that charts well in many different formats, and some that really doesn't work in some of the standard formats. So it's worth thinking about which of these will do the right kind of job. Now, it's handy for beginners to go to recommended charts and just get a sense about what this kind of data lends itself to, where it would work well. And so what we would have, for example, what they volunteered for us is a clustered column that you see here, a bar chart, a pie chart, and this thing which is called a Pareto chart, which is kind of advanced, and we're not going to talk about it right now. So let me just start with a pie chart. These things are kind of fun and easy to get along with. A nice simple place to start. So I'm going with pie chart, and down below I have my little OK button. I click, and instantly here's my chart. All right, now these charts can be carried around, moved wherever you want them to be, and so on. If they're a little on the small side, they can be resized and so on as well. So all these handy things that you can do to it. Now I just want you to look at the chart for a moment and just think about whether it would be of any use to somebody or not. I mean, you look at it and you see it's quarter one. You see that we're talking about things that are probably expenses down at the bottom there, like, rent, utilities, payroll, insurance. And we see these pie slices that are somehow teamed with those by color. This is not a good chart right now. It's missing the things that make it really meaningful to anybody who's trying to learn something from it. Now, the first thing would be the title. Now, that's this little thing up here. And if you notice on my screen, it's a little text box just floating free. So this title is not really adequate for what we're doing. So I'm going to add a little bit to it. It already says quarter one because that was up there as a label. I'm going to say quarter one expenses 2019. Now at that point, that title is meaningful. And whereas just quarter one doesn't tell you what year, and it doesn't even tell you what kind of thing we're looking at here, because rent and utilities, etc., could conceivably be payments to you from some other source, right? So we're saying these are the expenses. Now the other thing that's missing here are clear labelings of amount. As we look at the details of quarter one over here, the numbers are very, very obvious, right? But these things don't make it so. Now here's the thing. Look up at the top of Excel, and what you'll see is that there's a new ribbon, different than the insert one that we clicked to get here. This is the Chart Tools ribbon, and you'll see Chart Tools, the words right up here at the very, very top, right above Design and Format. So this is a special ribbon, which is only here in the context of editing a chart. Now, I want you to look at the very far left, Add Chart Element. The chart element that's missing in this case that we need are data labels. So here we go. I click the button. Data labels. Now, as I mouse over the entries here, well, I expected them to pop, but they're not. So let me just go ahead and try best fit. And now what we're seeing is the precise values that make those things up. So this is handy. This is a meaningful chart at this point, and someone who had to know and understand this budget a little bit better would probably understand it better in some ways by looking at this chart than by looking at the data table. Because now this kind of, you can almost feel the amounts of money involved rather than just, you know, seeing a bunch of numbers together. All right, now again, this thing can be moved around, it can be dragged down below, etc. But I want to show you something we can do with this too. Look at the very right-hand side of the ribbon. Right, so we come up here, it says Move Chart. I give it a click, and it says Move Chart. Choose where you want this thing to go. Now, right now it says Object in Dog's Daycare. I don't want that. I'm going to go New Sheet, and I'll call it something like, you know, quarter one expenses. I'm not going to get any more detailed than that right now. And OK. Now you need to get your bearings here for a second. The chart looks pretty good. It's now big. It's using up all the available space in front of us rather than floating on a page. Look at the bottom of the screen so you take in where you are. We're now on a special New Sheet tab that says Quarter One Expenses. Just to the right of that is Dog's Daycare. Please go back there. All right. Now we still see on screen a selected version of the data for the chart we just made. There are important things to be aware of about this. Let me give you an example, because these are the things that people often have a problem with. If I select something like this, it's probably obvious to you that there's a problem here. But it's amazing how often this one slips by. Now watch what happens. Here I go. Where are the charts? Insert. It's a good idea to start with recommended charts while you're kind of figuring this thing out. So we click recommended charts. Now, look at this. If I open up that pie chart, I mentioned something about this in class the other day. And if you look at this thing, the thing that's most noticeable about it is that there's a pie piece here which is half the pie. Now, if you look along the bottom, this thing that has the little color codings and the labels is called the legend. That's the chart legend. And what we see above is one of the elements in here is the total. In other words, all of these things put together. You will almost, there are some rare occasions where you will want to include the total, but very rarely using special kinds of charts and such. In this case, this is ridiculous. This just, this adds nothing. So if you want to see something kind of interesting, just follow my mouse here. And again, you don't have to really do this exactly right now, but I hope you'll be making some little versions of these things as we go. Now, do you see that there's something that looks kind of like a fill handle down here on that guy? I'm going to try to get on top of it there and drag it up one. Now, do you see what I did there? I go up. Now, I just did some damage to my chart. It is fixable. However, what I did is basically drag the selection off that bottom area there. This would be pretty easy to fix, first of all, with just undo. However, there are times when you're working on a chart, and frankly, if something goes wrong, it may be shorter to simply delete the chart and start fresh than to fiddle with all the little details too much, right? So this is the correct range. Now, what if you need to do quarter two? All right, same basic idea, but quarter two. Well, I select my labels. I'm going to need these labels, right? So I know what everything is. And then think of the technique that I taught you just recently for selecting multiple but separate things to add up together. And that involved first a normal selection and then a control select choice. So here we go. I hold down control at this point. I didn't need to do it right away, right? I hold it down now. I select the values for quarter two. I go insert, recommended charts. Let me do a column chart this time. All right, and now I have the values for quarter two. So anytime you've got data in the table that you need to capture, but there's gaps between it, that's how you solve it. Exactly the same way we did the other day using the control key. Now, when you look at a chart like this, once again, the title is kind of garbage right now. So let's say again, like quarter two, expenses, comma 2019, because that's what it's talking about. And then when I look at this this little legend down at the bottom, you notice there isn't really a legend here. These are just labels. And so in this case, the column above rent is, representing against this overall kind of like number line over here, how high that value was. We're missing data labels, clearly, right? So for someone looking at this, it would be kind of hard to figure out, looking at these things, really meaningfully what those numbers are. And the difference between, say, $5,000 and $10,000 is significant to all of us. So let's be a little more accurate. And you probably remember, we go to Add Chart Element, right up here. Now there's a bunch more things in here this time because there's other elements available for some charts. And I'm going to go to Data Labels. And Best Fit is not an option. It was for the pie chart, but it's not for here. And then all of these choices are basically going to be about, inside the column, outside the column. It can be a little weird. Let me try outside end. Now what that should mean is that the exact value for that column piece should pop directly over it. And there we go. And I'd have to say that that's probably a pretty good solution to this thing. All right, so we've got a good title, we've got good data labels, and then just so you see, because this can be kind of fun, there are options for design that are up here as well. And so if I mouse over some of the choices in here and give them just a little quick click just to show you, our chart will instantly take on the design characteristics of the example up here above. They're rather nice, right? So we can go through and, sometimes I'll ask you to exactly match something I'm doing. Sometimes it's fine with me if you go crazy and, especially if you have a little fun and you can make it kind of fun and vibrant. So now, let me pick something a little bit better than that. All right, I'll go with that. Now, once you've done that, there's also this choice up here, just a little bit further to the left, where you conceivably could just choose a different color setting for the baseline. I was pretty happy with what we had, so I think I'm going to walk that back. And now, here's a really weird detail about this, right? So again, we can move these things around, etc. If I go up here, end of the ribbon on the right-hand side, to where it says Change Chart Type. This is a live, right in front of you right now kind of choice, right? I give it a click, and I look and see there's a whole lot of different types of charts here now. And that's because we're seeing over here all of the chart types rather than the recommended ones, right? So in this grouping, there are some terrible choices you could make, and it's better advised not to, right? But for example, a bar chart. What's the difference between a column chart and a bar chart? Well, a bar chart is kind of like a column chart tipped over on its side, organized horizontally. And there are cases where that simply becomes a more convenient way to show the information. All right. Now, I'm going to call this one finished. And once again, I want to remind you, you can place them in a very sensible way by going Move Chart. We're going to make it a new sheet. I'll just call this one Quarter 2. Say OK. And here we are looking at this big, beautiful chart. All right. And again, as we look along the bottom, you're going to see that there's our original chart from before. Here's this one, and back here we have this again. I think I want to show you one last example here, and that is I'm going to take these labels and the totals. Now that means the total for each quarter. So that's what we're contrasting here. And those values, of course, are down here, down at the bottom. Now, you know what I'm going to do to achieve this, right? Now that I've got my first selection, I'll hold down Control, I'll click and drag across those guys, and there we are again, right? Again, leaving out totals in almost every case. All right, so once again, go Insert. We can take a peek at recommended charts. There's several different things available here. I think I'm going to go with a column again just for the moment here, because there's one more thing I want to show you about that. We'll say OK. There's our column. Now, by now, I hope you're assuming that when you do a chart for me, I want labels, and I want a title which is meaningful, right? So at this point, what would be a reasonable title for this one? Well, we're looking at it. This is every quarter, right? So the quarters are distinctly, clearly a part of this. Every quarter for an entire year. And so, and it is also, of course, it is expenses, right? So what I'm going to do up here is say 2019 expenses by quarter, right? And again, when I look at something like that, I really understand what I'm looking at. Titles are helpful when they include the time that's involved, you know, the category of thing that's going on that's involved, and of course the breakdown of the thing, right? All right. Now, kind of a fun little thing to show you here. There are ways that you can go that will make these things much more vibrant. And so let me show you again. If I go up here to say change chart type, right? Here is at least a bit of color, right? I'm going to choose this one, say OK. I've got a little bit more color going on here. Now, I've got some dumb stuff that I really don't need. Like, what is this happening down at the bottom all of a sudden? That chart has deprived me of the labels that were down there before. And it's a little strange, isn't it? Let's just see what happens if we go back to what we had a minute ago. I'm just going to undo and undo. Yeah, and here these guys come again. All right, so it can be a little weird, but we could, of course, fill those in with the add chart element over here. Let's see, here's a few more dramatic choices, and these guys are being a little more polite and not just completely removing something that we've chosen to have as a part of this. It's interesting. These are highly colorful up here, and then down below it's not changing. I'm not exactly sure what's happening there, but it's interesting. And one last thing about this. When you have a chart like this selected, here and there you'll get 3D effects, and once in a while you'll want 3D effects. They can be helpful for certain things. And again, if we go back to change chart type, we'll see not so much the big colorful samples here, but just above on this line, we have varieties of ways of laying this thing out, including a simple 3D clustered column. That's this one right here, and I'm just going to click it and click OK. And you can see what's different about this one. It's got a kind of an angle or a tilt to this thing, which under some circumstances can make things a little bit easier to read. Not always, not guaranteed. It's on a case-by-case basis. All right. So I think I've shown you some of the things that are most important to the assignment. And before I go on for an hour here, I'll wrap this one up. And then if I think that there's something else I better say about it, I'll maybe come back and make a much shorter one. All right. Thanks, you guys.